Hello, everybody, and welcome to Carpet City Cinema. I'm David Weaver, and just start right off the bat. I'm recording this on a Sunday night, the 23rd, and literally within like the last hour, I guess, or a couple hours, pretty cool physical media announcement just came out that the 1986 long-desired cult classic horror movie Trick or Treat is finally going to get a Blu-ray release by Red Shirt Pictures in conjunction with Synapse. Red Shirt Pictures is the company owned by Michael Felsher. It specializes in producing featurettes for physical media releases, but he also has started his own line, the first title in that line was After Effects, a documentary he had made on the early 80s horror film snuff movie, take on snuff movies effects. And this is going to be the next one coming out in conjunction with, like I said, Synapse, the label that did Creature from Black Lake and so many other movies. Trick or Treat is one that has not had, I don't know if it ever had a DVD release. I can't recall off the top of my head, but it's long been wanted on Blu-ray. There was like a release in Germany, I think, but it wasn't supposed to be all that hot. But this film, which stars Mark Price, Skippy of Family Ties fame, stars him as a rock and roll fan who's concerned that his beloved singer that he idolizes, rock singer, is going to come back from the grave and wreak havoc. And it was directed by Charles Martin Smith. It was the first movie that Smith directed. Smith at that point had already, of course, been a really well-known character actor, played Toad in American Graffiti. He had been in the Buddy Holly story. And this would be the beginning of a second career behind the camera for him. And he's continued to act, but really directing's kind of taken over in his career. A lot of family-oriented films. The first Air Bud movie, he did that. The two Dolphin Tale films. But yeah, this was his directorial debut. And the cast also includes rock legends Ozzy Osbourne and Gene Simmons. So this is one that has been long awaited for, and they just announced it tonight. So pretty cool to see that finally happening. And of course, we have to make sure we bring this all around back to Gila Films. So Charles Martin Smith, as you should know, you may not, was in The Curious Case of the Campus Corpse, the film debut of the one and only Jim Bolson, who also is star of The Last Frankenstein. Big shout out, by the way, also to Jay Leonard. His film Break Glass has just been accepted into its second film festival, the Jersey Shore Film Festival. Of course, if you haven't been listening to this podcast before, Jay is the producer of The Last Frankenstein, the film I directed and wrote. So big shout out to him for another laurel on the poster, and to the cast and crew. And it's cool that this, like the other film festival they got into, Cinefest down in New York City, that they are both relatively local, so to speak. Yeah, New York Cinefest is down in the Village, and Jersey Shore isn't too far away either for him, this film festival. So congrats to them for that. Unfortunately, I had some sad news this week regarding a local filmmaking colleague, Jack Abley. Jack was a local businessman. He was into construction. That was his trade, and very successful at that. But he always had a passion for acting. And to further that, he would produce and direct films that he would often be the lead in. Back in 2012, I crossed paths with Jack when he was gearing up to shoot a horror comedy called Dating a Zombie in Troy, in and around Troy, New York, which is like 45 minutes away from where I live. And this was kind of at the time, I may have touched on this in the first episode, where I was getting back into film. I really hadn't been too heavily involved in some time. Life had just kind of gotten in the way of things, and I was really determined to, reintegrate myself into the filmmaking community, into the filmmaking process. To that end, I had lined up 2 gigs back to back. One was my internship on The Place Beyond the Pines, the Bradley Cooper, Ryan Gosling film. And then the other was this gig on Jack's film, where I was hired to be a production assistant, and then was kind of given a boost up to work on the camera crew. And interestingly, this film, the cinematographer on it was none other than Aaron Moorhead, who since then, of course, has gone into great success with his creative collaborator Justin Benson. They directed the very well received horror films Resolution and The Endless. More recently, Synchronic just came out that they directed a little while ago, and Something in the Dirt is their newest film. They've also been directing for Marvel episodes of Moon Knight. But yeah, Dating a Zombie. So I also appear in the movie Dating a Zombie. I have a small part as a zombie tied to a fire hydrant because the person who was supposed to play the role was delayed, so I had to pinch in. But yeah, Jack was known in the local community. He directed a couple movies after that. He was kind of a complicated guy. As we all are, I guess you could say. But I always got along well with him. His projects, because they were local, oftentimes, shared cast members and crew with those who worked on The Last Frankenstein. He did a couple movies after Dating a Zombie, and he stayed in touch with me a little bit. He ended up letting us use some of his lighting equipment on The Last Frankenstein early in the shoot, which was really nice of him. I did kind of lose touch with him, though. He was moving around a lot, moving back and forth on the East Coast. And then I just, saw some people posting about it. I guess it's just kind of making the rounds now. I saw some people posting on Facebook that he passed away on December 31st. So, yeah, definitely condolences to his family and friends, and definitely was a well-known figure in the local filmmaking community. And some of his stuff's out there. I think, well, actually, a lot of his stuff's out there you can watch. I know Dating a Zombie is like, I think that's on Prime. It's probably one of his more accessible films. But yeah. So a salute to Jack. Also passing away recently. Not of such a personal connection. A couple people though I just want to shout out. The first was Avery Crounce. Not a household name, but well known to horror films. Crounce was the writer and director of the 1983 cult classic folk horror movie Eyes of Fire, which that sat in kind of like oblivion for a while after, it was released theatrically. It had VHS and Laserdisc releases, but I don't think it ever had a DVD release. And then when Severin Films came out with their giant folk horror box set, they were able to track him down and acquire the rights from him and do a whole new, HD master of the film and get it released and get some new attention on it. But that would be the first of only 3 movies that he would direct. He would follow that up with the sci-fi comedy, The Invisible Kid in 1988 with Jay Underwood. And then in 96, he did a drama film called Cries of Silence. But he passed away at age 71. Definitely was unexpected. So sad to see that we lost him, but also, great that Severin was able to get in touch with him to restore Eyes of Fire, because I believe he actually owned the movie, the rights to it too, and had the elements and everything. So it's good that they were able to rescue that and put a light back on him before he passed on. And then the other person I just want to give a shout out to real quick is Carol Locatel, the actress. Horror fans know her very well for her role in Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, which was the 5th entry in the series and the franchise, and the one that is somewhat divisive for fans because, spoiler alert, of course, if you're a fan, you already know this. It's the one where it turns out that Jason Voorhees isn't the killer, that the person wearing the mask is a completely different character. This was an attempt by the franchise to go into a different direction after really wanting Jason to be dead at the end of the 4th entry, Friday the 13th, the final chapter. And there was a plan for the mask to be worn after this film, the 5th film, by yet another character. But obviously, fans weren't really too keen on that whole idea, as they weren't with Halloween 3 when that came out. We talked about that a week or two ago when that came out without Michael Myers in it. People wanted Jason Voorhees. But, Locatel is kind of looked at as the highlight of the movie, Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. She plays this foul-mouthed backwoods woman named Ethel. This really vulgar, crass, motorcycle riding lady in the film that fans really have come to love and appreciate. I gotta admit, I'm not. Even though I love the Paramount Friday the 13th films, I personally, this is not one of my favorite ones. But shout out to her, anyways, though. And she showed up in a bunch of other cult films as well. She was in the Pam Grier movie Coffee, the No Mercy Man. She was in This Is a Hijack, which is a decent B movie from the 70s. Did made some appearances in a few Burt Reynolds movies. She was in Sharky's Machine, Paternity, and Best Friends. Also showed up in The Day Trippers, the beloved indie film. So yeah, had a great career. Passed away age 82. So sorry to see her move on as well. So pretty good week for new title announcements. Imprint Films out in Australia really knocked it out the park with the titles they just announced will be coming out. They're gonna be releasing a few different box sets. One of which is a film-focused Gene Hackman, it's called, and it's a collection of 4 of Hackman's movies. Now, 3 of the films on this set, The Domino Principle, March or Die, and Bite the Bullet. They've had previous Blu-ray releases. Still cool that they're going to be out. Especially Bite the Bullet is out of print, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but the really big, for me, the big winner here is that it's going to include the worldwide Blu-ray debut of Hackman's film "I Never Sang for My Father," which is a terrific movie. Came out in 1970. It portrays the kind of troubled relationship between Hackman and his father, played by Melvin Douglas, who is getting on in years and still trying to assert his independence. They don't really have the greatest relationship. It was a very highly acclaimed film based on a play. Earned nominations for Best Screenplay. Douglas earned a Best Actor nomination. Hackman earned a Best Supporting Actor nomination. I picked up the Sony DVD. I got it for Christmas, I think, a couple of years ago. And yeah, it's just a really terrific movie. Very great performances, very relatable, very realistic. So really, really excited to see that this is finally going to get a nice Blu-ray release out of Imprint Films. And then the other set they're putting out that really caught my eye, this I think is probably the one I'm most excited for, is a collection of movies directed by Sidney J. Furie. Now, in terms of Furie's best-known films, that would probably include movies like The Ipcress File, which is the classic 60s Michael Caine spy movie. It was the beginning of a trilogy of films about that came out in the 60s about about a secret agent named Harry Palmer, who Caine played, and it was really the one that is considered the best of the 3. Really helped cement Caine's leading man status. Fury also directed Lady Sing the Blues, which is the acclaimed biopic of Billie Holiday that Diana Ross starred in and earned a Best Actress Academy Award nomination for. And then in the 80s, Fury directed the rather ill-fated Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. But still, definitely a pop culture title that people are aware of. And he also directed Iron Eagle, the Louis Gossett Jr. Aviation film. And he also directed the second and fourth entries in that franchise as well. Now, this box set, the titles in it include the 70s blaxploitation film Hit with Billy D. Williams, and actually all 5 movies in the set are from the 70s. The Vietnam War film The Boys in Company C, and the excellent dirt bike racing character study Little Faust and Big Halsey, which stars Robert Redford as a dirt bike rider and Michael J. Pollard from Bonnie and Clyde as his mechanic. And a terrific film, by the way. I saw this a couple years ago for the first time. It's very atypical role for Redford. It's very much in keeping with his performance in Downhill Racer, the skiing movie, where he's playing someone who's not really that likable. It's got great songs by Johnny Cash in the film. Now, those 3 titles have all had Blu-ray releases before, somewhere or other. Then the other titles, though, the other 2 titles in this set have never been released on Blu-ray before. These are worldwide debuts. The first is The Lawyer, which is the film that spun off the TV series Petrocelli. This is a legal property where Barry Newman plays a lawyer in the American Southwest. I had watched this because my girlfriend and I, we watched the Petrocelli show. She watched most of it. She wasn't a big fan, so she kind of bowed out near the end. But prior to that, we wanted to see The Lawyer, and the only way to check it out really was to get it on Prime. But it was like a really old VHS tape master that they had on Prime. It was not in the right aspect ratio. It wasn't the best quality. but watchable still. So it'll be cool to finally go back and revisit that film and a brand new transfer. And the other film in the set that's making a worldwide Blu-ray debut is the movie Sheila Levine is Dead and Living in New York. This is a comedy that stars Jeannie Berlin as the title character, who is a young Jewish girl looking for love in the Big Apple, and co-stars Roy Scheider. Heard good things about this film. Another one that I really wanted to check out for a long time. I don't think this even had a DVD release. The Lawyer as well never had a DVD release. So really stoked that Imprint is finally going to make these titles available. I'll definitely want to pick those sets up. Now, over at Warner Archives, they also dropped a new batch of titles that they're going to be putting out soon. And the one that really stuck out to me among those is from 1950, King Solomon's Mines. This is based on the H. Rider Haggard novel of the same name, and it follows his famed adventure character, Alan Quatermain, played by Stuart Granger, as he tries to help Deborah Kerr find her missing husband deep in the African jungles. Now, I have to admit, this isn't the kind of genre that necessarily appeals to me, those kind of like trekking through the jungle adventure films of the time. I don't think that a lot of them hold up that well, but this one, I did see this years ago, maybe when I was in high school, and this one really is pretty enjoyable, pretty entertaining. Also has Richard Carlson in the cast, of course known to science fiction fans for Creature from the Black Lagoon and It Came from Outer Space. The movie of course, is one of several takes on the original novel, but this one was actually nominated for Best Picture. It actually was definitely met with some acclaim, and it won Oscars for cinematography and editing. So I'll have to make sure to pick this up perhaps during the next Warner Archive sales. And we cannot talk about new releases without giving some love to Kino Lorber. This weekend, they just dropped that they're going to be putting out on Blu-ray the classic 1943 Ernest Hemingway adaptation, For Whom the Bell Tolls, starring Gary Cooper and Ingrid Bergman. Now, this had a Blu-ray already from Universal Studios, which was generally considered one of the worst Blu-rays in existence, and they just did a new 4K scan of the film. So it'd be great to kind of like finally see this in a better light. This is another one I haven't seen in some time. I was pretty young when I watched this. Man, I don't know if I was even in high school yet. So this is another title I'd be looking forward to revisiting and checking this out again. It also was a film that took home a bunch of Oscar nominations, including Best Picture and one for Best Supporting Actress for, I probably am totally mispronouncing her name, Katina Paxinou. But yeah, definitely looking forward to revisiting this later on. I also gotten a bunch of titles from Indicator's latest sale. Indicator is it started out as a British label, Blu-ray label, but they've also opened up a U.S. branch essentially, and they've also started dipping into 4K titles as well. They have a couple sales a year, really good prices, so I snagged a bunch of stuff. I'm thinking of maybe trying, if I'm even adventurous enough, to do like a video of what I got from that haul and kind of go over that stuff. I think that might be interesting to try that out. I'll pop that up on YouTube and see if that gets any kind of response. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, otherwise everything's going well here at Gila Films. We're closing in on 900 views on the YouTube upload of The Last Frankenstein, and I just got word via Film Hub, which, as I mentioned before, is the site that different entities can go to and license the film for streaming. I just got notified that the film has been picked up by 2 additional platforms, Cinedigm, and also very excitingly, Apple TV. Now, I don't know yet when the film is going to go live on those sites. It's a process and it can take some time. So I will make sure to post that on the social media and also let you know here when it's actually live at those sites. But obviously, Apple TV especially, that'd be a great boost to getting eyes on us, getting eyes on the project, and of course going into the sequel and as well as the Blu-ray release that will be coming up. And yeah, I have a meeting tomorrow with Jay Leonard, our fearless leader, producer extraordinaire, which will result in some very exciting announcements by the time of the next episode, I think. But yeah, more on that later. So, moving on to a film I watched last night, first time watch of a very flawed but very interesting film from 1973, a Western titled The Deadly Trackers. And it stars Richard Harris as Sean Kilpatrick, who is the sheriff in a small town not too far from the Mexico border. A sheriff who has built a reputation for basically apprehending any criminals with minimal violence. Anybody who has to deal with, he's able to get those situations under control without having to resort to a lot of gunfire. So one day into his town rides a group of four men intent on robbing the bank. And this, of course, leads to, a lot of violence in the town, including the deaths of both Kilpatrick's wife and young son. And the criminals, they head across the border into Mexico, where Kilpatrick has no jurisdiction, no authority. But he's, he's the proverbially hell-bent on revenge character. So he crosses the border to kill them, frankly, not to apprehend them, but he just wants to, have his pound of flesh. And he keeps crossing paths with a Mexican police officer, Gutierrez, played by Al Lettieri. And Gutierrez, he's a very much by the book police officer, and he wants to apprehend the leader of this gang of criminals, a person by the name of Frank Brand, played by the great Rod Taylor. He wants to apprehend him because he's wanted for another charge, a different matter in Mexico that Gutierrez has a witness for, and he wants to, go by things the right way, arrest him, bring him to where the witness is, and have him go to trial. Whereas, of course, Kilpatrick, played by Richard Harris, he just wants to kill these guys. Now, this movie went through a really difficult production. Started out with Samuel Fuller as the writer and director. Fuller is the famed maverick creator of such films as The Naked Kiss and Shock Corridor. He did Pick Up on South Street. He often worked outside the studio system, not always, but a lot of times. He had a very independent streak, and he wasn't afraid to, deal with controversial matters. And so he had written the story for the film, which was shooting under, there are reports of different titles it was shooting under, either Riata or Kill Brand, which I really like that title because it kind of has like a double play, double meaning, both in terms of the villain's name, last name, and then, Kill Brand. So the film started shooting in 1972, and Richard Harris was always in the attached in the lead role. Interestingly, Jim Morrison, I guess, had approached Harris. Fuller talked about that in his autobiography, but Fuller had rejected him for that role. And Fuller had actually considered Mick Jagger to play the part of Brand in the film, but the person who actually ended up getting it was Bo Hopkins, the character actor known for his many films with Sam Peckinpah. He was in The Wild Bunch and The Getaway. He was also in American Graffiti. And in this incarnation of the film, there was apparently a sizable female part. Now, in the movie, the final product, the two main female characters are Richard Harris's wife, Kilpatrick's wife, who you see very little of before she's killed near the film's beginning. And then later in the film, the great, wonderful Mexican actress Isela Vega plays the part of Maria, a prostitute. But that's not till like in the last act of the film. So in the film's original incarnation, like I said, I think that there was a female part that was larger. I don't know if that was supposed to be the wife part. I couldn't find out any details about that, or this prostitute part, or maybe a totally different character. It was initially announced that Nina Van Pallant was going to play that role, be the female lead. She was in Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye. And then Fuller, he wanted to cast in the part Juliette Berthaud, the French actress who had been in Godard's film Weekend. But the problem came up was that a producer on the film, Barry Kulick, he instead wanted to put a different French actress in the part, Juliette Mills. Not the Juliette Mills who was in Billy Wilder's Avanti. She's the British actress, Haley Mills' older sister. This is a different actress. So they began filming. Also in the part of the Mexican lawman was Alfonso Arau, who, as an actor, was known from The Wild Bunch, and later, of course, in the 80s, was in Three Amigos before also becoming a director in his own right. He directed A Walk in the Clouds. But yeah, they started shooting, and they got about $1 million into the film, and Warner Brothers shut it down. Um, they put out the word it was due to production difficulties. There were rumors that the execs were really unhappy with the performance of the female lead. Um, Fuller, not Fuller, I'm sorry, a Los Angeles Times writer thought that maybe it had something to do with a scene that was put in the film with the character of Kilpatrick having hallucinations after doing peyote. So there were some different stories going out there as to why exactly the film was shut down. Obviously, Warner Brothers was not happy with whatever was going on in the production, though. And I heard too that I read also that Harris and Fuller had kind of a bit of a combative relationship. Although Harris himself was upset when the film was shut down because then Fuller was removed from it, and Harris wanted to continue with Fuller on the project. But no, they brought filming to a stop and basically got rid of everyone except for Harris, and decided to completely retool the project. So they began filming. The initial filming began in October '72 in Spain. By December '72, roughly around there is when it shut down. And by May '73 is when they're up and shooting again. Now they're filming in Mexico, though. They've changed the film's title to The Deadly Trackers. Barry Shear is now directing. Barry Shear did such films as Across 110th Street, which is a really good neo-noir with Anthony Quinn and Anthony Franciosa. He had done one of the stories in the original 3-part Night Gallery TV movie. He did the counterculture cult classic Wild in the Streets, as well as the pilot TV movie for Starsky and Hutch. So he was brought on board to direct. And the idea was that, they kind of put out there that it was a completely new project, it was a completely new entity of itself. But really, I guess the idea was it was basically following the same storyline. The plot of the movie was the same storyline as when Fuller was in charge. Lucas Heller, who is known for all the scripts he wrote with Robert Aldrich, movies like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, The Flight of the Phoenix, The Dirty Dozen. He ended up getting the screen credit on the film, but he himself actually wanted his credit removed eventually because he didn't like the finished project, although he was not successful in doing that. So the movie starts up again, and Al Lettieri, of course, takes on the role of the Mexican Federale. Rod Taylor, of course, now is playing the role of Frank Brand. It's not known whether or not any of the Samuel Fuller footage ended up in the movie, but it's thought that it was all scrapped, all done away with. It's interesting though because I was thinking about if you could divide films into different groups, movies that are consistent in terms of their quality from beginning to end, whether that's quality is good or bad, just the idea that they maintain consistency. Movies that start off at one level and then decrease in quality as they continue, or movies that are the opposite, they get better as they go along. It's that third category, I think, that's really the one that is the smallest, right? That occupies the least percentage of films. I think most movies are of a consistent quality because, it makes sense, right? Because it's usually, it's a consistent voice, even if it's, again, this doesn't mean the film's good, but it's consistent in terms of whatever quality it has. And I think probably right underneath that, probably right neck and neck is the group of films that decline in quality as they continue. I mean, we've all known that, right? We've all seen movies where like, oh man, that last act didn't just quite hold up, or the last scene didn't really hold up. Especially you see that with movies that start off well because they you have like this high bar that they set early on in the film as you're watching it, and then it's kind of difficult to maybe maintain that really high level of excellence, or it's just because as you're watching a movie and it's starting out and you're really into it and you're really enjoying it, there's kind of almost like this expectation you've created for this film to kind of live up to as it continues, and it can be difficult for that to happen. And that really, like I said, that really small group of films tends to be the ones that get better as they go along. As you're watching it, it actually improves. And The Deadly Trackers is definitely in that group. Starts off really weak. Um, it really kind of gets into the robbery, which plays such a important part in moving this whole plot along because it's what leads to the deaths of Kilpatrick's family. It starts right off with the robbery, but I think that was a mistake. I don't know if they just wanted to kind of get right into the action, but the problem is that we don't get really any time to spend with really with Kilpatrick to understand, his way of thinking about how this led him to be a sheriff who doesn't like to resort to violence. They kind of try to like telegraph it to you through some voiceovers about him talking to his son about guns and the danger that they pose. Um, but it's really actually not till like very late in the movie, like the third act, where he has a real conversation with Gutierrez, the Mexican police officer, about how he became a law officer because his father was wrongly gunned down while being questioned, and about how he felt the need to become a police officer because he says something along the lines of, if there are going to be good laws out there, if good laws are going to exist, they need to be enforced by people with a sense of justice, rather than just people who just feel that they can go by the letter of the law and do whatever they want as long as they're in keeping with that, and it really doesn't matter what the consequences are. You don't get that dive into his character until, like I said, like the last act of the movie. And that's something you really need early on to really understand him. You can't just get that through like shorthand of just a little bit of voiceover, the classic, father-son moment about, oh, gun's a tool and be careful with it, that kind of thing. It's really also awkward at the beginning because the entire prelude of the movie leading into the actual bank robbery is done through still photos with voiceover. So there's like still photos of Richard Harris talking to his son, still photos of the bank robbers scoping out the town. And I don't know, like it's interesting because so this film, the music score for this film is basically cribbed from the Wild Bunch. They basically were like, we've already spent tons of money on this movie. We're just going to use tracks from the Wild Bunch. And it's interesting because the opening, it reminds me of the Wild Bunch, Sam Peckinpah's classic Western from 1969, a terrific movie. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Where the opening titles for that movie, it's a mixture of like still photos and moving action where like you'll have a still image and then, like a credit will go over it and then it will start moving. It'll turn into moving footage. And I was like, I almost kind of wonder if they just were like, we're taking the music from that movie. We might as well kind of, do a play on how it opened up. Except we'll just do still photos. We won't have any movement. So it's just this series of still photos with voiceover. Watching it and knowing about the film's production history, I was kind of like, did they like shoot these scenes and intend to actually show them, and then like because of all the problems with the film's production history and actors who were recast and stuff like that, all they could do was just use snippets of it? I wonder. I don't know. It's really, I don't know if it was an artistic choice or just something had to do with the footage, but it's just really, it's odd and it's unsuccessful. And like I said, we really need more time with Richard Harris's character to really kind of get into his mindset and to really let his belief system sink in, because this is a revenge film. And it's a film about a man who adheres to this certain personal code about trying to avoid violence, who, of course, then becomes this bloodthirsty, hellbent, vengeful man. And, think about Death Wish. Before Charles Bronson goes on, his vigilantism spree, we spend time with him on vacation with his wife. We spend time even after the attack on his wife and daughter, going to the police and seeing what are the chances of apprehending these criminals, visiting his daughter and seeing that she's not improving. It doesn't just start with the rape murder scene and then cut right from there to, Paul Kersey blowing away people. That's kind of the approach of the sequels. But, or even, think of other revenge movies of this era, which is a great, great decade for revenge films. I mean, think about something like Deliverance, which obviously isn't, I'm not trying to oversimplify it by calling it a revenge film. That's a film of many things, but there's also that aspect of it where it is kind of a revenge film, and you're spending a lot of time with that group of four men on their camping trip before they cross paths with the hillbillies from hell. So that's definitely, a weakness to the deadly trackers, and a weakness that kind of is like really hammered home right away. So you're watching this movie and you're aware of what the plot is. It's going to be this movie about this guy trying to avenge the death of his family, the sheriff. And immediately it's, starting off with a really awkward visual presentation and storytelling with these still photos and narration, and like no time to get to know the characters. And also, just an extra nail in the coffin is that in like the first third of this movie, there's a lot of ADR. If you're not familiar with that term, in other words, that refers to, creating people's dialogue in post production. There's, for whatever reason, you need to have a character say a line of dialogue, and either the recording the sound on set, the sound with the quality was bad, or you need to change the line, or for whatever reason, you have the actor or actress come in during post production and read the line, and then you dub it over the movie. And if done well, it's hopefully not noticeable. And films rely on a lot more ADR than you probably realize. But in this movie, it's like it's not great ADR. Like it really stands out. I mean, there's moments in this film where like the ADR doesn't. You're not even sure if it's the right actor. Like a character will say something, and you're like, is that actually the actor who plays that character? Or do they just have to find someone who kind of sounded like that person? And that bad ADR is kind of like reinforced by the fact that you're spending this opening time with just narration and these still images. So it's like all your mind is processing is voiceover. And so when you go from that right into like, scenes with a bad ADR, it's kind of like even more jarring. So the film's, we get into the film. We meet these four outlaws, by the way, right from the beginning. And it's an interesting group of characters. Okay, so they got Rod Taylor, who of course was a leading man in the '60s, usually the good guy in films like Hitchcock's The Birds, The Time Machine. He plays Frank Brand, who's the head of these outlaws. And judging from his uniform, you can tell that he was obviously on the Confederate side during the Civil War. He's sociopathic, really. And Taylor is terrific in this part. I mean, I'll get into it more later, but he just really brings so much to this part. The three guys with him, there's Jacob, who is played by Paul Benjamin, the great character actor, who had been in Across 110th Street, the Barry Shear movie from the same director that I referenced before. He's definitely comes across as more intelligent and more cultured than the other guys in this group of four. But there's a tension between him and Brand because he's black, and Brand has no problem, sticking it to him with some derogatory racial language. Neville Brand, another wonderful character actor, plays Choo Choo, who is a guy who is missing one hand, and in place of that hand, literally has a section of railroad track because, it's almost like insane that they thought of that. So his character talks a little bit about it later on that he was in a train accident during his youth. His father was killed in the accident and managed to push him out of the way of this train, but it still cut off this guy's Neville Brand's hand. And so, as a tribute to his father, he replaced that missing hand with a section of railroad track, which he uses to beat people with, of course. I think it would make you kind of disadvantageous as a criminal to have that weight hanging from one side of you and limit your ability to use firearms, I would think. But hey, who am I to judge? I didn't live in the Wild West. And then the fourth member of this gang of outlaws is Schoolboy, played by the wonderful William Smith, who we all know from Conan the Barbarian, playing Schwarzenegger's father. He was in Red Dawn as like the evil Russian general. He was in Any Which Way You Can with Clint Eastwood. And of course, as per usual with William Smith movies, he's an amazing physique, but he's called Schoolboy obviously because his character is rather dim-witted, not kind of slow, not the sharpest guy, but he's no problem with being violent. And in fact, all four of these criminals, I mean, they really are like irredeemable criminals. I mean, they're grimy, they're grungy, even Jacob, who's probably, like I said, he's a little more cultured than the other ones. He has no problem like cheating his fellow cohorts in cards. They're without remorse in any of their criminal activities. Shout out though to Neville Brand, whose character, despite Neville Brand, of course, is when you think of haggard, shaggy, grimy character actors of the '70s, Neville Brand is right there in the dictionary. Of course, Eaten Alive, the classic Tobe Hooper horror movie, he is like the definitive Neville Brand character. Um, and of course, his career goes way back to the '50s and '60s with classics like Birdman of Alcatraz and DOA. But shout out to him for having the cleanest teeth in this movie. It's rather bizarre. I guess the makeup artist didn't catch that like these guys are like, slimy, grimy criminals living in the backwoods, but Neville Brand has like the whitest, cleanest. I just got out of the dentist chair teeth ever. Just kind of stood out to me, a little something that stood out. So the first third of the movie is it's kind of unremarkable, disappointing. I don't know what you want to call it. It doesn't speak well for the film. The problems I've already mentioned. Also, Richard Harris's character Kilpatrick, his whole approach to basically avoiding violence just seems really kind of unbelievable and ridiculous. He first gets concerned at the opening of the film because he sees these guys ride into town, these four outlaws, and he doesn't recognize their faces. And of course, they look like Murder Incorporated. And so he starts, getting his deputy and saying, I think, obviously trying to prep him that something is about to go wrong. And then, of course, they hear a gunshot go off because, Rod Taylor kills this guy at the bank. And his plan of action, which apparently he's had for some time because the entire townspeople know what to do in a moment like this, is that all the townsmen run to a central location where they have stockpiled weapons and ammunition, and they go up to all the rooftops under orders not to fire, and they block off all the entrances and exits to the town with stagecoaches and lighting fires from gasoline or kerosene or whatever that they have stored just for this moment, in an attempt to kind of just funnel these outlaws to a point where all these, where a group of townspeople are waiting for them, led by Harris, and they can hopefully get them to surrender without a fight. And it's just kind of really kind of takes you, takes you out of it because you're supposed to look at Harris, as this character who you hold in high regard as a really effective law enforcement officer, and the idea that you would be living in the Wild West and you see these unsavory people come into your town and they're committing violence because you hear them shooting guns, and you're just hoping that you'll be able to corral them into a point where they just throw down their weapons without ever having to fire a shot in return, without ever hoping to kill them, is just really hard to take seriously. I mean, the fact that they hear a gunshot go off at the bank, and Richard Harris is basically all right, let's get the men to the ammo and guns. I don't know, maybe you should run to the bank and find out what's going on. I mean, you don't know if there's how many people have been killed. You don't know if someone's been wounded. It's just kind of oh man, there's something bad going on at the bank. So let's get all the guys armed up on the roofs at the edges of town, and we'll actually confront the problem head on later. It's it completely takes you away from kind of buying into the idea of Kilpatrick as this really as this character who is someone to reckon with. I think that if you saw guys, armed criminals, riding through your streets in the Wild West, and you knew that gunfire had gone off, and there's a good indication that someone had been injured or killed, I don't know. I just feel give them a warning, yell at them, be like, "Hey, you should put your guns down, surrender." And if they don't, just shoot them. Don't go overboard with the whole non-confrontational, non-violent approach. It's a bit much at the beginning. And again, it's interesting because all these problems are, like I said, corralled into the first act of the film. But then as the movie progresses and, you get to this point where Harris is really becoming more of a vengeance-minded person. He crosses over the Mexican border. His deputy tries to stop him, tells him, don't do it. This is for the Mexican authorities. You don't have any jurisdiction here. And he's basically just go back to the town and take care of my family's bodies, their remains. That's where the film starts to improve. It's where it's almost like they filmed the last two acts of the movie, and then we're like, oh crap, we're running out of time. We got to quick do the first act, because the second and third act are they're much more fleshed out. The cinematography, the compositions, the filming of stuff is done better. That's where you also spend more time with Rod Taylor's character of Brand to get to know him better, which is really important because obviously, uh, he is the one who is directly responsible for killing Harris's wife. He's the leader of the Outlaws. He's responsible for the death of Richard Harris's son. So you know that this is gonna, it's a no-brainer. You know that this is films on a collision course between these two characters, and it's obviously the other outlaws will be dealt with initially. And it's really in the middle of the film that you really get a glimpse of what makes Taylor tick, because at the same time that Neville Brand's character is talking about his father and how he lost his hand, Rod Taylor, and not too much here in the way of spoilers, but just to give you a little something, he basically kind of without even any emotion just talks about how he killed his own father, and it really has this kind of like I said, sociopathic quality where he really doesn't care about what he does. He has no problem killing. Uh, he has no problem with any form of violence to get what he wants. Now, the introduction of Gutierrez, the Mexican police officer, of course, it serves as a way to have a stumbling block in the film, so that Harris it just doesn't become Harris constantly, kill this guy, chase the group, kill another guy, chase the group, kill another guy, chase the group, catch up with Rod Taylor, right? Because that's what the film could be. They introduce this character of Gutierrez, which kind of breaks it up. Both in terms of the narrative, allowing him to have these interactions with Harris, which sometimes are holding Harris back from achieving his goals, but also to have this philosophical dichotomy to the film where you have this two law enforcement officers, and one is we're very by the book. No matter how bad or savage this guy is, we're going to first we'll apprehend him, and then we'll take him to trial and see if we have any witnesses, and we'll go throughout this with the proper procedures. And Harris, of course, is just it just wants to kill them. But it's weird because, again, as the film progresses, it starts bringing up these these more intellectually driven ideas, which are very interesting to think about, because Harris has this whole part in the movie, like I mentioned before, where he tells Gutierrez, Alatiri's character, he says, I wanted to be a lawman because I felt that good laws should be enforced by men with a sense of justice. And then he says after that, he says something to the effect, or at least he says, or at least that's what I used to think. He's kind of indicating that, he's kind of turned his back on the philosophy that led him to become a law enforcement officer. And the implication, of course, there is that Gutierrez represents that type of law officer that Richard Harris thinks he used to be. Someone who, stands true to the law, who is, a servant unto it, who is intent on justice. But really, when you look at the events, that's not really true. Harris's character of Kilpatrick is really, he feels that what he used to stand for was justice. In a way, that's what he's continuing to stand for. And it's really Gutierrez, Alatiri's character, who's so by the book who has really lost sight of that. Because we're in a situation in this film where, of course, these guys, this is like the wide open spaces of Mexico that they're traveling into. And, it's been made very clear that Rod Taylor and his group are responsible for horrible violence in Texas or America, where I forget what state it's in. I think it's Texas. And are likely responsible for this really horrible violence in Mexico. But if you follow this code of we got to go by the law, chances are, that they're going to get away with the mayhem that they create, because the only thing that really can, as the narrative presents itself, the only thing that can really hold them accountable is this Mexican officer arresting them, taking them back for trial, where he has this one witness who can supposedly ID, Frank Brand, Rod Taylor's character, and in the Wild West, the wilds of northern Mexico, where law enforcement is few and far between, and like post Civil War era, the chances of making that all happen, the chance of actually apprehending this criminal who's armed and moroseless and with other armed people, the chances of Gutierrez, a lone officer, actually being able to hold hold this person accountable, of actually being able to subdue him into some type of captivity and get him back to a place where he can be held accountable, is really, it just seems like asking for a lot. Whereas Harris's vision is like, I know these guys are guilty of the worst possible criminal acts, that if they, in a perfect society, they would be, if they were to be put on trial, they absolutely would be found guilty and executed. So rather than risk them getting away with their lifestyle, um, because we're gonna make some, ridiculous attempts to take them alive, let's just kill them. Let's just track them down and kill them. And in a sense, that that really is kind of, and don't take this the wrong way. I'm not out here, preaching vigilantism and stuff. But I'm just saying, from the broader perspective of things, especially as this film story takes place in a time and a place where there really wasn't much in the way of law enforcement, Harris's viewpoint, even though he thinks his viewpoint that they should just be tracked down and killed, even though he thinks that that's a rejection of the ideals that he had become a law officer under, it really is actually an embracement. It's an embracing of those ideals, just on a level that he perhaps had not considered. And it's really, like I said, Gutierrez, Alateri's character, his willingness to let these guys continue on with their crimes if they cannot be apprehended according to the legal system. That's really a sense of injustice. And I think as the film progresses, as we spend more time finding out about Rod Taylor's character. We find more time with Richard Harris's character. We get into these kind of ideological discussions. The film gets better. It really does get better. The filming of it gets better too, with like the actual visualization of it. As they get into Mexico, they start, encountering these really great locations. There's a scene between Neville Brand's character Choo Choo and Richard Harris in this. I don't know what it was originally. It's this giant, like abandoned stone structure. There's also an incredible scene at a convent later on in the film, a shootout at a convent in Mexico. A couple really striking locations there. And also, as the film progresses and is giving us more meat for these characters, as we're spending more time in the minds of Richard Harris, of Rod Taylor, because the actors have more meat to work with, then they're able to put forth more, right, with the performance. Like, Rod Taylor is basically just kind of like two-dimensional evil guy through a lot of the beginning of the film, because that's all his character. That's all we see of his character. He just shoots a guy in cold blood. Shoots Richard Harris's wife. He's not really given the scenes to kind of really develop that character and give the actor a chance to show more. But as that happens, especially, again, I don't want to give too much away, but as a key revelation comes out about Taylor's character in the last third of the film, he's really able to kind of, dig inside and do more with the character. And he, even, especially also, his interactions. I should also shout out his interactions with Paul Benjamin. They're, the tension between them, the racial tension between them. Taylor's really good in those parts. And, it's unfortunate that the film didn't structure this kind of, the psychological aspects of the film so that we saw more of that early on, right? Getting into Harris and his whole, vision of law enforcement, and really kind of taking the time at the beginning of the film to really, show him with his family, because that's also something that gets shortchanged, right? Like, if the whole motivation of revenge for this movie is, avenging the deaths of his family, you want to have a time to kind of, build that bond on screen between him and his son and him and his wife. And because their interactions together are pretty much limited to those voiceover over still photos at the beginning of the movie, you really don't get anything more than just like some shorthanded idea of what the relationship is. Like, okay, yeah, he loves his son and his wife, and they're all American Wild West family, and yeah, we get it. It's very, like I said, it's telegraphed, it's shorthand. Again, going back to Death Wish, Death Wish does more just in the scene of Charles Bronson at the beach with his wife at the beginning of the movie and clowning around with her and taking pictures of her. and it's not really even spending that much more screen time, in terms of showing Charles Bronson interacting with his wife than say Richard Harris interacting with his family and the Deadly Trackers, but it's just um, so much better crafted because they realize, we're no one's coming to see Death Wish because they want to spend an entire hour with Charles Bronson and Hope Lang before shit hits the fan, but we have to take the time we have to really utilize it to really sell this relationship so that when it's taken away, it really has impact. Whereas with the Deadly Trackers, it's like, oh, we just need to do the bare minimum, the basics. Show he has a wife and a son, and they're good people, and he loves them, and then kill them. So it's unfortunate that, like I said, that a lot more development wasn't done at the beginning of the narrative, because that would have made it even so much more impactful as the film continues. Um, and so it's weird to have like, an entire third of your movie, the first third of your movie be this weakest part and be the part that could, think about the first third of a film really just being bad, just not being good. Um, think how that threatens to derail um, everything that comes after. I mean, I watch a movie from beginning to end, no matter how good or bad it is. But I mean, obviously, there are a lot of people who will just, they'll tune out of a movie. I've known people who walk out of a theater if they're not digging the film, or they'll turn off the TV, or they'll switch channels. And so this is your entire first third of the movie is by far the weakest point. Not ideal, but as a viewer like me, of course, it's very rewarding to see the film unfold and to have it start to draw you in and be like, oh wow, this is really interesting, and it's cool to see this portrayal of Rod Taylor and who he is, and Richard Harris and who he is, and similarities they might have. And obviously, I've talked about before about how much I love the '70s. It's such a great decade, and this film really does draw from some of the strengths of that decade as it continues. It really is. I don't know. Like I don't know how people would react to a movie like this these days, because I don't really watch these movies with other people. I don't sit down and watch a movie like this with some 20-year-old. It'd be interesting to just to see what they think of the content, because it's a movie that's, I guess, I'm assuming people would think it's pretty brutal. Like there's multiple scenes of adults using kids as basically body shields. People getting shot in the face, and it's just a really a film that's, whether it's effective or not at any given moment, it's not afraid to be brutal or savage. Yet, because of the time period in which it was made, it wasn't trying to be brutal or savage, right? Like I don't think that in the '70s they thought like, oh, we're gonna really shock them, we're really gonna really make them freeze in their seats. I think this was just how they did things in the '70s. This was just the way they did things. Like, they didn't shy away from things that we might today kind of not want to have the focus on. And I think that's great about the '70s, because it just makes it, it just sells the realism of it so much more. Now, the ending of the movie, I can't really talk about that without obviously giving stuff away. So I'll just say this. I get what they were going for. I don't think they pulled it off the best way. I think there was a better way to do it. And I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. This would be a film, and this will probably sound incredibly arrogant on my part, but I'll say it anyways. I'd love to remake this film. I don't think Warner Brothers is going to call me up anytime soon, and frankly, I don't think Warner Brothers is going to call up anybody anytime soon to remake The Deadly Trackers from 1973. Probably not very high up on their intellectual property rights list. But this is definitely a movie where there's so much promise, yet enough flaws about it that it's worth taking a second stab at this property. Yeah, I'd love to see. I would love to see this in the hands of someone. Imagine this film in the hands of someone like Sam Peckinpah, or even like Robert Aldrich. These directors who are known for their unflinching approaches to filmmaking, and who dealt with these kind of characters and these kind of settings and these kind of time periods. Yeah, I mean, it would be great. It would be great to have seen what either one of them could have done with it. But yeah, so The Deadly Trackers, very, very flawed. There's no way of getting around it. Like, serious flaws in this film. serious wounds were inflicted on this film. But there is so much in it that makes it worth watching. And like I said, one of the minority in terms of being a film that actually gets better as it goes along. If you watch it, stick with it to the end, for sure. This is been put out on Blu-ray by Warner Brothers through the Warner Archive line. I just picked it up not too long ago during one of the Warner Archive sales. So I don't know if it's streaming anywhere. It might be on Prime. You probably have to pay for it on Prime or YouTube. That's the way it is usually with Warner Brothers titles. But yeah, I mean, you can usually wait for a sale or just pick it up for $15. I'd really love to see. Hear what anybody who listens to this has to say about it. What your thoughts are on it. And again, just the production history of it is fascinating. All the stuff that it went through. If you get a chance, the American Film Institute, their website, they have a section of their website called the AFI catalog where you can type in films, and they basically have congregated whatever information they can find about these films from different sources like the LA Times and Variety and Hollywood Reporter, I think. So I looked up the Deadly Trackers, and it had all this information on it about the troubled production and pulling from different sources, contemporaneous sources at the time. Really interesting. And then of course that led me down a rabbit hole to look up other movies too. But if you watch the film, check out that listing on AFI catalog, because it's really interesting to read about that, the production. I guess it was referenced to in books on Richard Harrison, Samuel Fuller. I would love to kind of dive into those just to get kind of a fly in the wall look at what happened with this film, and it'd be cool to find out what really did cause them to shut it down. I don't know if it would have, it's interesting. Would it have been better? Just because Fuller was removed and the film was shut down doesn't necessarily guarantee that version would have been any better. And again, like I said, I don't know how different that incarnation was going to be. It definitely seemed like maybe a female role in that original version was going to be larger. But yeah, it definitely doesn't mean it was going to be better. But still, it would have been interesting, of course, in a perfect world, to see what Fuller had intended. It was a rough time for Fuller. He had directed the Burt Reynolds movie Shark in 1969, which he wanted his name taken off of. It had, when it was released, it was completely, in his opinion, had been butchered by the producers. It wasn't the version he had made, essentially, and so he wanted his name taken off it. He did a film for German television in '72 called Dead Pigeon on Beethoven Street, but it wasn't until 1980 with his World War II film The Big Red One. He went, this 8-year stretch before he directed another feature-length project. This fell apart. Obviously, The Deadly Trackers. He was involved with The Klansman, which is a great unheralded film. Came out in '74 with Lee Marvin and Richard Burton, which Fuller was brought onto as a writer. He may have been brought in as the director too, but that film also had a really difficult production. So, Fuller was in kind of like a difficult point in his career, especially after, the 60s, where Shock Corridor and The Naked Kiss, considered two of his greatest films, had come out. But yeah, The Big Red One, of course, that would be 1980, and that would then be considered a rival for the title of best of his works. But yeah. So definitely check this out and let me know what you think about it. Shoot us a message on social media, or you can email us at carpetcitycinema@gila-film.com. The Deadly Trackers, 1973, directed by Barry Shear and starring Richard Harris and Rod Taylor. So I think that's going to bring us to an end for this installment of Carpet City Cinema. I've said it before, and I'll keep saying it. I'm hoping to have a really good announcement for you. I think it will be next episode, regarding the future state of The Last Frankenstein in the world of physical media. But until then, thank you for your support. Thanks for listening. This will be up on YouTube as well, the video file version of it. And so just keep spreading the word about the podcast. And if you ever have any questions or comments, feel free to hit us up. Thank you very much, and have a good night.